Alright, everybody, welcome back to the latest episodes of the Adventures of the Monk and the Monarch, featuring me, the Monarch, and our local monk, Mildra.
Hello.
So, when we get into our topic today, we're going to be talking about Shonen battle manga and if it is overhated. But for the time being, let's first talk about what we've actually been watching lately.
So, as tradition, I suppose I'll start on that front. Now, for the purposes of a later project, I've been revisiting Karas, which seems to be part of my growing list of absolute classics that are absolute hell to get officially.
I know how that
And
goes. I recently picked up Rurouni Kenshin, but I only just realized there's not even a Blu-ray release of Rurouni Kenshin, and the DVD box set that it comes with just doesn't put the DVDs in the right order.
Let me raise you one on that front and bring up the fact that the absolute classic that is Samurai X Trust and Betrayal, i.e. Rurouni Kenshin Suyo Kuken, is very hard to find in DVD or Blu-ray, and is not on any streaming service.
And this is why piracy exists.
This is also why I'm on the shit list of half a dozen voice actors whenever they try and wag the finger about piracy.
Yeah. But anyway, on to Karas.
Now, I will be going into further detail on my own show when we discuss it in the Parliament. But Karas was a 6-episode series that was basically a anniversary special for Tatsunoko Productions, and even for as old as it is, it still holds up really, really damn well. I do think there is a lot. The story is one that's rooted in implication, so some people might miss some details with the story, especially with how the story is told. It is kind of funny that the villain is placed by the guy who would become live action Shaggy. I'm not kidding.
Voice actors end up in weird spots sometimes that you just would not expect.
Some more interesting than others, and sometimes I end up on their shit list.
As you do.
But I can't call myself a TTRPG punk if I don't ruffle a few feathers, now can I?
Oh yeah.
But beyond that, I've and maybe we'll go into this more detail at a later date, but I've mentioned I'm not the biggest fan of CG use in anime. Unless it's all CG, and even then there's problems, because it's something that breaks my immersion when it's done at times. The people who know how to do it smartly will integrate it where I don't notice it. But but you and I have both gone through our fair share of anime that had really obvious CGI moments.
It is very distracting when that happens.
Now, of course, just to cover my bases, the idea of doing all CG, that's not a get out of jail free card either, because while certain studios certain studios and certain works have been able to pull that off, like say Beastars, for every Beastars you've got 3 X arms.
I almost want to watch that one day just because it keeps coming up. Yet I still haven't sat down to watch it.
I know it's easy to pick on the idea of Crunchyroll originals, but I do want to make clear that X-Arm wasn't Crunchyroll's fault. The fault with that lies on the director being far too arrogant about the idea of using CG and mocap. And even the director of Beastars told him that's a bad idea. Because the guy who directed X-Arm, most of his experience was in he had very little experience in the anime end of animation beyond music videos, and he figured he could use mocap to fill in the gaps. Even though again he was told by one of his colleagues, "Don't do that. That's a bad idea." There's a lot of mocap is only the first step. There's a lot of touch-ups to make it not fall into the uncanny valley. But I should note that in preparation for when I did the Parliament episode on The Promised Neverland recently, I ended up rewatching and rereading The Promised Neverland, and I kind of wish I didn't, because one would think after the infamous dud of an ending that we got with the anime that the manga would be better. If I'm saying it in that kind of tone, I think you know where this is going.
Yeah. Maybe the whole story should have just ended at the escape from the orphanage. I would have been fine with that.
There were actually several arcs in the manga that the anime skipped over before the ending even happened.
Oh yeah, I'm aware of those.
But I do think that the story could have extended past the escape from the farm. It's more the execution. It's always the execution. But lastly, I did bite the bullet and I took a look at Spy Family. I'm not quite caught up because I've been multitasking quite a bit the last few weeks. But as tempting as it would be to say that this is just another flavor of the month, I can't say no to any anime that has jazz in its soundtrack.
See, I'm not a big jazz fan, but for some reason, you throw jazz in an anime, it works for me.
I just happen to be both.
Yeah, it's one I'm interested in watching. It seems like it's basically the anime version of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. At least from the premise. I know there's going to be a lot more to it than that, but...
Oh yeah. And fan artists have already made that gag. Quite literally, I've seen fan art of Mr. and Mrs. Forger.
Yeah, it's one I'm waiting until like most of the episodes are out before I'll sit down and watch through it.
Understandable.
Like, completely unintentionally, I seem to have been watching like mostly just action-based anime leading up to this. First one I've watched since our last show was Girls Frontline. Now, I knew heard the name before when I started watching this, and this anime is basically made for people who are already familiar with Girls Frontline. I started watching it and I realized there is so much the show seems to expect me to care about without really establishing anything, and yeah, turns out it's an anime based around some gacha game where you collect a bunch of anime girl dolls to fight a war. So yeah, if you don't already like Girls Frontline, don't start here. It's clearly not meant for anybody else. Which, that's fine. It's just, not really clear going into it if you don't preemptively do research. Which I hate doing before having to watch a new show.
It's fair point, though. Fucking hell, I could have told you that.
No.
If you had told me you were going to be watching Girls Frontline, I would have told you go watch something else, because I'm pretty sure you don't indulge in mobile games, especially not gacha games.
Yeah.
And I've had my policy for years of no mobile.
Yeah, I will say the animation in the show is actually rather good. It's got a lot of really interesting and fun fights. The tone is a little inconsistent. You will have it's basically you get one of them gets shot in the arm, like they have no arm anymore. They may be like robots, but bullets will still kind of start to shred them up. So you're kind of expecting something a bit grittier, somewhat more realistic, like this is still an over-the-top anime. But then they turn around and they try to snipe one character. As the bullet's mid-air, she turns around and stops the bullet with a bullet of her own. The tone's just a little weird sometimes and not consistent. Other than that, the last thing I sat down and watched through was Tokyo, the 24th Ward. You heard much about that one?
I've heard a few things here and there, but I haven't delved too deep at this time.
The first comparison I got by a certain point in the series, I won't spoil what made this comparison obvious, but it's clearly drawing a bit on Psycho Pass. The more obvious thing doing it is there's this thing called the Hazard Cast in the 24th Ward. It's basically like an artificial island in Tokyo Bay. Is a kind of social experiment they don't get too many details on, can this work? The Hazard Cast is basically a system that's gathering all kinds of information from cameras, data, and just predicting from a range of things from crimes to natural disasters. So you kind of got that going. Most of the focus is actually on the three main characters trying to deal with the death of someone who was important to all three of them a year prior. But they all get a call from her number at the same time, and they get a vision of the future. anytime they get this call, it basically presents itself as a trolley problem. Like, you do this to save these people, or you can do this to save these people. It's kind of how the problems are presented to them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the first one, they managed to essentially save everybody, but as time goes on, it's getting, like, harder to do that. There's, like, an ideology clash between the three different people. It's actually quite an interesting show for the most part. You do have to deal with some kind of bad dialogue from time to time, where they're almost talking like they're not people for certain moments of the show. It's not like a beginning to end of show problem, but it does happen, and it's very distracting. Animation's a bit odd to describe, because when it gets like high action, the animation looks great, but everything's oddly stiff. It does not feel like this was a very high budget. It's another thing. It's not consistent quality throughout, and it's very distracting when it is a problem. Otherwise, like, all the best things I can say about the show, though, I kind of don't want to because it would spoil it.
Mm-hmm.
Makes it a hard show to kind of talk about, unless you're talking about it with people who have already seen it. And the only other one I managed to watch through this past month is pretty similar, or it's pretty much on topic for our discussion today. I finally sat down to watch the Shaman King reboot. Have you taken any time to see this one yet?
No. Although some of our mutual friends have.
Alright. For about 6 episodes, I was like, alright, I don't think this is going to be a classic or anything. But, some interesting enough characters. It can be funny. Some decent action. And then at first, I thought episode 6 was going to be the highlight. Like, for those who don't know anything about Shaman King, people are basically summoning and binding spirits in order to fight. Whoever wins this tournament that comes up will be named the Shaman King. The second actual fight of the tournament, he fights with like a guy, a necromancer basically, who's like binding a large number of really weak spirits to like skeletons and all that. Mm-hmm. And it ends up being the first time the main character loses a fight. It's not that the other guy is stronger. He doesn't like have stronger spirits. He's not more skilled as a shaman, but he's clever and very like manipulative, and basically manages to win the fight by being a slimy bastard. So I'm like, they let the main character lose. They had an interesting fight to build it. I'm like, alright, this is where I thought the show was going to start getting good. Until the necromancer just straight tries to kill the main character after the fight, and he gets saved by the guy the show's building up as a villain, or at least a threat. Now that's not the action that actually ruins this. Like, I'm okay with this happening. Up until just a line of dialogue so bad, it just drained all hype I had for the rest of this show. Like, he shows up, destroys the giant skeleton monstrosity that was created, and says, "These people didn't drink enough milk while they were alive. I have at least 3 glasses a day." Like, this is the guy they've been building up as the biggest threat of the show so far. He's never said anything like that prior to this point. And
Are you watching this dub or sub?
Sub. The milk thing keeps coming back. Like, the milk line isn't a one-off, and like, he's not involved with the necromancer again in any of these other episodes. But milk is just a running joke with him now. And I don't get it. And then I started to think about the rest of the show's dialogue, and while it's not that bad, it all kind of starts to feel like it falls in that same camp. And the show just started getting painful. Mm-hmm. Like, again, it doesn't really do anything great. So when you start dropping stuff like that in, it just overshadows everything else going on.
I'll probably end up taking a look a little bit down the road. So
yeah, I guess with that, it's probably a good time to shift into the actual topic of shonen battle manga.
Which I think before we even delve into that concept, something that we need to make clear is what constitutes a battle manga. Especially since it's a definition that I hadn't heard until the last few years.
Yeah, like when I hear the term, I basically think of like those shonen anime that focus mostly on the fighting. Mm-hmm. It's like Dragon Ball Z back in the day. I'd throw One Piece in the category. Shaman King I would definitely put in there.
Yeah, and of course, there's more recent examples of this. But part of the reason I wanted to put forth this particular topic is because of the fact that I think overhate is something that we as fans should be mindful of. Now, the way I define something being overhated is when the hatred for the hatred or dislike crosses the threshold from disliking something because it's low quality and disliking the idea of it. If I had to use an example, consider the amount of hate that Call of Duty got in the mid 2000s when it was actually somewhat good. The Modern Warfare and Modern Warfare 2 and Black Ops and World at War eras.
Like, I don't like those games, but I'm not a first person shooter fan. Like, they're not made for me. I'm not really the
Yeah,
kind of person who
the
should be judging the quality of those.
the point is that a lot of the hate that I saw around that time was less focused on the features or narratives of the game, and more focused on hating the idea of it. Um, I saw the same thing with the people who would argue the WRPG versus JRPG things in the seventh generation, which I've already made clear I hate the term JRPG, and I've made clear as to why. But if I need to use an even bigger example, the Schumacher Batman films, which I am not going to sit here and say that they are good, but I do think a lot of people's arguments for why they were bad seem to focus less and less on the actual content and more on the idea of certain things. That and people fixating way too much on the bat nipples.
Don't get me wrong, that was stupid, but that's not really a huge draw against the movie. It's just an oddity.
Yeah, I know why Schumacher pushed for it. Especially with the Greco-Roman excesses of his version of Gotham City. But there were much bigger problems. Uh, and to be fair, the real tragedy is because of those films. People for the longest time overlooked the good films that Schumacher had in his filmography. I will admit that with time, the films have gotten something of a reevaluation now that the damage has passed and we've had other more recent offenders. I.e., people are spending more of their time hating on Batfleck, so they don't have the same vitriol towards Schumacher. But nevertheless, when you're hating on the idea rather than the subject matter, it's hard to take the issue seriously because of the fact that it's very easy to hate it. It's very easy to hate on an idea, especially when you're just jumping on a bandwagon. It takes a little bit more effort to dislike something because of its quality issues. If it sounds like I'm saying that kind of straw man overhate is critical junk food, well, that's because it is.
Like,
And for the longest time, I would see people dismiss a lot of shonen battle manga, and I'm not saying all of it is good. I have my problems with all of them, but I would see people dismiss it with some variation of it's all the same.
yeah, that's something I've heard come up from time to time for quite a while now. I'm like, nah, I don't think so. Like, there's definitely similarities, but
Um, well, there's been this attitude, and I don't know when this started, but there's been this attitude that I think that similarity is equal to the same, or to go more hyperbolic, ripoff.
I mean, if we're going that route, as I've recently discovered because of all my watching of One Piece, there's a lot of main characters that seem to be trying to get that same charm Luffy has to varying degrees of success. Like, we'd have to wipe out so many anime if we were just getting rid of them because they're just ripping off Luffy if we go that vague.
And it's not like Luffy's particular style isn't descended from the style that um Goku had in the original.
Yeah.
All that I'm saying on that front is I think a lot of people could do with a bit of perspective, but I'd say I'd say one of the first times that I found this particular motif to be annoying is right around the time Black Clover started coming out. And I started seeing a lot of people say that it was just ripping off both Naruto and Fairy Tail. And in my not so humble opinion, I can certainly see that, but once you go past surface level, and once you go past the first few chapters of each, that comparison doesn't really have as much weight.
I will say, like, I think there's definitely a difference between clearly taking an influence from something or just trying to rip it off, or in some cases just not understanding the influence. Like, I would say the lead character from Trinity Blood. I cannot remember his name for the life of me.
Abel Night Road.
Yeah, like, on one hand, they're clearly trying to do a bit of Vash the Stampede with his pacifism type thing. Now, I don't think they ripped him off, but that's a case I think they entirely missed the point, because I'm convinced in certain scenes, I'm like, he killed that man. Like, no, he killed that person, and after the fact is when the whole, oh, he's actually still alive and wasn't actually killed because Abel's totally a peaceful guy. But
I think that there was certainly a starting point taking influence from Vash, but I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel comfortable going that far with Trinity Blood because the story was never finished by its original author.
Yeah, again, I don't think it's a ripoff, but I do think it took some inspiration and wanted a Vash-like character without really understanding exactly how to make that work, at least in terms of the anime. I can't vouch for how it came across in the manga. And also the anime's dub is what I watched, so I don't know how reliable that was.
Any sort of like I said, there's certainly the starting point. There's certainly a similar starting point, but they end up going in significantly different directions, and that goes further and further with the way that the manga ended up going. Which, if Trinity Blood had been done today, we probably would have gotten more of the story that we did, and it probably would have been handled by a studio more equipped for it, because Gonzo was not the right studio for an art style that detailed.
Quite possibly. So I do actually still like Trinity Blood, for the record. It's not an all-time great, but
one of my favorite tabletop RPGs has cited it as an influence, that being Anima.
Yeah.
So it's certainly got its merits, but I do think that because of the fact that I'd say a lot of people who throw around the term ripoff or that things are all the same haven't done a whole lot of creative writing in their own life. So I don't think they grasp the amount of moving parts that are involved with creating anything.
Yeah, like,
because I hear people lament the death of originality, and I'm like, you do realize that everybody takes notes from everybody.
Yeah. At times I wonder, like, are they just like taking specific aspects they like about a character, and then they see those same aspects, are they only thinking about the character that they originally liked?
We do a lot of comparative thinking as humans.
Definitely.
That's something that can't be denied. However, I do think that the reason why I say that is that it's very easy to utilize a few bullet points to build an argument around, especially when you're only watching a small sample size of something. Like I said, the rip-off claims I saw regarding Black Clover happened very early on when the anime came out. But as time went on, I started to see those claims pop up less and less. Oh, there'd still be the claims from certain elitists that would dismiss the thing as derivative, but one of the sayings in my temple is "fuck the grogs."
Maybe we
And
just have a very high bar before we think things start to become derivative. Because I can think of a lot of anime with a lot of similarities to older anime. I'm like, I don't think that's derivative at all. Like, I brought up Tokyo the 24th Ward just at the beginning. The inspiration from Psycho Pass is undeniable. Like, even one of the twists I won't spoil is very similar to one of the twists from Psycho Pass. Same premise of the Hazard Cast is very similar to the Sybil system. More than enough separating it, though, even if it does have a lot of core ideas that are almost directly related to each other.
well, and when it comes to a lot of shonen works over the years, an argument that I'd often hear is that you have just another power up of the moment. And to be fair, I'd you have when you have a whole generation that probably grew up watching or reading DBZ, that is going to influence their work to some degree. Uh, However, a saying that my mentor had years ago was, "Art is not a math problem," and it's something that I've used in my own writings from time to time, because you can't really boil down any given story into a series of bullet points.
Try to do something like that, you're going to miss all the subtleties and the interactions that you really can't put in those bullet points. You miss out on too much.
Consider for a moment a lot of save the world kind of stories. Truth be told, unless it's being done by a hack, save that kind of the saving the world part is usually secondary to something that's more personal.
Definitely.
Or it's a case of things escalating from the initial intent. And since I brought up DBZ, consider everything that happened on Namek. The sole reason they were even going to Namek was to get their Dragon Balls to try and wish back everyone they lost during the Saiyan arc, and just everything escalating from there. And I'm not putting that in as an example of brilliant storytelling or something like that, but more to illustrate that the world saving part is often secondary.
And because this seems to keep being a decent example, Tokyo 24th Ward. Yes, the story's largely about like the conflict between the different ideas and like the efficacy of the Hazard Cast and other related things. A lot of the story at its core ends up revolving around these three different people just trying to deal with the passing of someone all of them cared about. It's fundamental to everything going on.
Mm-hmm. Now, when it comes to one of the other things that I've kind of suspected is, I guess the best way to put it is some sort of inferiority effect in regard to shonen works being the most popular compared to more artistic works that are a little bit less so. And whenever I see this kind of thing, I end up having to call it out because of the hypocrisy, not the hypocrisy, but the contradiction of nerds, weebs, what have you, valuing the approval of others.
Yeah, that's always struck me as a little weird that happens, but it does.
It does, and I've gone a bit harsh in saying that that a conformist nerd is not a nerd; they're a pretender. Now, obviously, I can say something like that given the whole punk thing that I try and embody with some of my work, but at the same time, the dismissals of the concept of shonen through lines like it's derivative or it's nothing but powering up and screaming. Essentially, this is why I bring up the term overhated, because that's what you have here with those sort of remarks. They're not remarking about whether or not a given work is bad, but just applying a few stereotypes that they may have gotten from watching a few episodes of DBZ and applying that to the whole a subgenre.
See, I think there might be another thing at play here, and it's not something I think is limited to just nerd culture. It's something generally referred to as the lowest common denominator. I think a lot of people will hear that term and immediately think that's necessarily a bad thing for some reason. Sometimes there's something that just is going to appeal to a larger number of people. I know this is going to seem a little weird. Almost universally, everyone has laughed at a fart at some point in their life. I don't know why that is. People just find farts funny.
Well, let me take that and raise you one a bit. You want to know what series I was able to use as a you laugh you lose when it came to some of my highfalutin friends? Jackass, in particular the movies, because as much as somebody wants to say that it's crass, sophomoric, or lowbrow.
I mean, it's all true, but
that isn't going to make it any less funny. Hell, I remember one of the morning radio show guys in my state watching. After he came back from watching Dodgeball when that was in theaters.
I love that movie.
And he had said, this is crass, this is sophomoric, but damn it, it's funny.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of people will see that low common denominator humor and kind of try to say oh no, I'm above that kind of lowbrow entertainment. And I think that's part of it.
You have no idea. I've made no bones about the fact that I'm a big fan of wrestling, especially the stuff in the Indies and especially the stuff in Mexico, the UK, and Japan. And
Joe Hendry is my boy.
Joe Hendry is on the list of wrestlers I would like to share a drink with one day.
My absolute favorite moment was when he was up against Noam Dar and he did that whole opening song about Noam Dar being in love with his hand. I don't even know who Noam Dar is outside of that, and I lost my shit in that song.
Noam Dar is an Israeli Scottish wrestler who would like to use Star Wars gimmicks to the point where he got nicknamed Dar Wars.
And wasn't one of his moves a bunch of his moves Oasis songs like Champagne Supernova? Or am I mixing him up with someone else there?
I think it was, but again, there's a whole lot of fun that can happen with indie wrestling, and Hendry would do that with a lot of his matches. He had one against Drew Galloway once where he did a custom video to the tune of Blue from Eiffel 65. Just redid it. I'm Drew.
I think I've heard that one too. I knew him because of the WCPW stuff that happened for a while. But anyway, shifting this back to your example.
But the reason I bring up professional wrestling is I've heard all manner of derision about it being fake, about it being predetermined. I remember a certain idiot calling it male soap opera. And the like, and for one, it's very clear that a lot of the people making those remarks were maybe only tangentially familiar with it in the 90s or the 2000s. And two, I don't get mad when people call it fake. I get mad when people think calling it fake is some kind of dunk.
My sister did that once. It's saying, it's all fake. How can you watch this? It's stupid. She's a big fan of Interview with a Vampire, so I just looked at her. I know this is going to come as a shock to you. Vampires aren't real. Yes, we know it's fake. We know these aren't we know they're not actually trying to murder each other with a bat full of nails and shit. A thing that happened in TNA, which we won't get into here. But yeah.
Never show her a Japanese death match.
Oh,
or
God.
Maybe you should, especially any of the ones with the piranhas or the exploding barbed wire cages. Seriously, when it comes to death matches in the States, we are so spoiled.
Japan death matches are weird. Anyway,
it's not weird. It's absolutely nuts. Because I'm not kidding about the piranhas.
Oh, I know. It's it's a little
But
far for my taste, but yes.
but the but the reason I bring that kind of thing up is you have this straw man of the idea of a certain shonen show rather than the rather than actually understanding the subject matter, because again, and the reason why I think those kind of straw mans exist is twofold. One, I think some people are far too self-conscious about their own taste than they're willing to admit. Because you'll notice that the people who enjoy stuff like Jackass or enjoy stuff like bad wrestling or bad movies, um, is the fact that they are fully aware that they are watching trash and they don't care. And even if a given anime is bad, an easy way to fix it is watching and riffing with other people. Speaking from experience here. Because it's not like I grew up where MST3K was born or anything.
Yeah.
But it's also comfortable because if you just point from an ivory tower, you don't have to run the risk of actually confronting what you were mocking and end up having to ask yourself, am I the asshole? Where and for what it's worth, I can apply this not to shonen battle manga. I can apply this to ecchi manga as well. Like, the people who enjoy it know that they like trash and they don't care.
Oh yeah, like I like my fair share of just horrible and stupid things. Like, I still like Angel Sanctuary,
and
that's utterly horrible. But I love it.
I have cat soup on the torture list just in case I need to humble my friends.
Okay, what is cat soup?
Hello Kitty on acid.
I'm going to have to see this one day. I don't even need to know any more than that.
Yeah, I have stuff like that, or mind game, or any of the weird stuff, just in case I need to remind my friends how deep the rabbit hole can go. But to be fair, when it comes to this overhate thing, I do think there's a relic factor, because in the early 2000s, you had Naruto, Bleach, and One Piece really being semi ubiquitous across the anime scene. Because remember, in that early 2000s, that was when the floodgates really started to open up, and we started getting more and more stuff.
And stuff that they were actually putting some care in, and not just flinging everything they could get their hands at the wall. I mean, that still happened, but
yeah, that still happens, and I don't want that to ever stop.
Oh, definitely.
But I do think that the type of shonen works that we've seen more recently, you can't some of these stereotypes you can't really put on them. Like, you could, a lot of the stereotypes that people may have put on shonen anime in the 2000s, could you really put that on stuff like Food Wars or even stuff like Hiroaka these days? I don't think you really can.
Yeah, there was a lot of unique stuff in the modern shonen battle that I hadn't really seen in a lot of the older ones. Don't get me wrong, there's definitely recurring tropes. There's definitely themes and things that have happened, like tournament arcs are almost a guarantee in just about any shonen battle manga.
And I can understand why tournament arcs are that big of a deal, because it's an easy way. Tournament arcs are a very easy, reliable way to introduce and develop a large cast of characters.
It's also a great way to get a fight between two characters in which you could otherwise not find an easy way to justify the fight.
Yeah. So I know some people get annoyed by the presence of tournament arcs, but it's really a win-win for all the moving parts involved. And I think a lot of people forget the one of the arguable origin points when it comes to tournament arc as a storytelling motifs. Have you ever seen a film called Master of the Flying Guillotine?
I have not.
That film has been cited by a few people as the inspiration for doing the whole tournament arc thing, whether it be the motif of a tournament to lure certain martial artists out, or in other forms.
Really, the tournament arc just exists because it works exceptionally well, and for the most part, it doesn't really detract.
Mm-hmm.
So if you hate tournament arcs, that's not changing.
If you hate tournament arcs, if you hate tournament arcs and you're a wrestling fan, don't watch New Japan, because they've got at least 4 of them every year. You've got the G1 Climax, you've got the Best of the Super Junior, you have the New Japan Cup, and you have World Tag League.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have one-offs like the time the Super J Cup returned a few years ago. But the G1 is the big one. 1, because it's a round robin tournament instead of single elimination, which doesn't happen all that often. 2, that one's big enough that it gets covered by mainstream press in Japan. But of course, I could also say, if you really don't like tournament arcs, don't watch any sport ever.
All sports are just tournaments.
Because what is the playoff bracket in any sport in the modern era but that? I think the only time it doesn't qualify is in motorsports.
I think so far, One Piece is the only anime I'm watching for these that has yet to have a tournament arc. That said, I'm like less than 200 episodes into it, so there's plenty of time.
I think One Piece is because of the emphasis on traveling. With something like One Piece, it's a case where you really couldn't get away with that.
Like, I think the Davy Back game was the closest thing to a tournament I've seen, but that's a stretch.
Yeah.
And the pun was not intentional.
That brings me to another cliche that people lump onto shonen battle manga, but has a richer tradition than people want to admit, and that is the training arc.
Who doesn't love a training arc?
Yeah, and once again, when you understand the reasons why that kind of thing keeps getting used, especially since it has a long tradition going back to martial arts storytelling, especially if you read a lot of older and newer wuxia series, there's an inheritance to that kind of thing. It's a way to do a more personal character development while also advancing time. I know some people would say that it's better to do that than a time skip. I do think time skips have their use when you treat it as a soft reset. A soft reboot, but a soft reset, as in you're resetting the board to set it up for a new set of circumstances.
Yeah, that's also a good way for maybe like a character that wasn't all that strong before. Who knows what could have happened in those few years? You can much more easily like bring up different characters that you might not have been able to do so as convincingly without a time skip.
Mm-hmm.
As far as a training,
when you just use it while not acknowledging the amount of time passed, that's the bad way to do it.
Yeah.
And I know it sounds like I'm overpraising shonen work, which is not my intent. My intent is to show greater context, because a lot of the arguments for turning up one's nose at shonen really only apply when you have an ivory tower look at it from the top. And there's also the fact that no matter what storytelling medium you come across, you're going to find tropes and motifs and the like. That's not something that you can escape. And I don't think it's fair to hoist by the petard one particular set of tropes while ignoring others, whether they be general storytelling tropes or tropes specific to anime.
Yeah, and again, a lot of them get used multiple times because they work. Like, just because it's used multiple times doesn't mean you're being derivative. It doesn't mean you're ripping someone off. These are things that just work.
If I'd be so bold, I'd say that trying to not be derivative causes you to be derivative in other ways.
Oh, definitely. I think you also run the risk when you're actively trying not to be derivative of just fucking something up. Like, you care more about coming across as unique and original sometimes than actually making sense.
Well, consider this. We've seen certain terminally online people write certain stories with the goal of not falling into certain stereotypes, and in the process they fall into completely other stereotypes that they may not have intended, or they felt that as long as they didn't fall into that stereotype, then everything else is perfectly fine, which of course isn't how this works.
Definitely.
And that can I think something else that I find interesting is that particular attitude of dismissing shonen work. You don't see it as much from people as they get older in a given fan base. In fact, they end up learning to embrace it. It could be a case of older people wanting to feel young again, or on the other hand, it could be a case of what C.S. Lewis once said: "When I became a man, I threw away childish things, including the fear of childishness."
I think that definitely has a big part of it. Because, it's one of the things I've noticed, because I've been to a fair few anime conventions. It doesn't matter which one it is, what state it was in. There is always an old man cosplaying Roshi, without fail. And when I am an old man, I will keep that tradition alive.
I would not be able to do that because there's no way I'd be able to get the beard right, and I'm not gonna do one of those clip-on beards. There's also the fact that I'm too damn tall, and even in my old age, I'm not gonna be shrinking that much. But
I'm a little on the short side, so I think I'll have the height down. I can also grow a pretty mean beard, so I think I got this.
Yeah, and I know I could get a fake beard, but I don't think anybody would want to have that digging into their head for hours on end. Plus, when you get hungry, you got to take the thing off.
Look, I know what it's like to wear something uncomfortable for hours on end, and yeah, that beard would not be fun to wear.
I was dumb enough to wear a 3-piece suit in Orlando, so what the fuck do I know?
I was dressed up as Vicious in Level Up Expo, which is in Vegas, in the middle of summer. That is not a fun outfit to wear.
I hope they had good air conditioning.
It was pretty good air conditioning, but the line that day was a little long, so I was out in the sun in that outfit for a little bit.
Well, that and for as good of air conditioning is, when you have a lot of people in an enclosed area, that's going to generate heat.
Oh yeah, it's worth it though.
It certainly is. And I've made it a policy to only attend conventions in the fall or late winter.
Yeah, that's none of the ones I end up going to are in that time. I'm gonna be in Houston again this year for Matsuri at the end of July.
I'm not gonna be at Matsuri this year, mostly because my Matsuri money got dipped into when I was fixing my computer.
Ew.
So,
were you there last year?
Were
you there last year?
No, I haven't been in a few years.
Okay, I was like, you were there last year. You should have said something. I would have said hey to you.
Well, you would have had to try and find me.
Yeah. I was running around as Frankenfurter, so I'd have been easy to find.
Oh.
But anyway.
Yeah. But when it comes to I think a large reason that quote from C.S. Lewis applies here is the fact that a lot of the people who I'd say are dismissive of battle manga and shonen in particular. I can't help but notice that some of them really overcompensate, thinking that they're better by the fact that they read seinen manga.
I can never remember what seinen manga is.
You know how seinen is. You know how shonen is essentially young or teenage men.
Yeah.
Seinen is older. The big example when it comes to seinen are seinen's 4 pillars of heaven, as I've called it. Which, why do I call it that? Because I like All Japan Pro Wrestling, or I did. But Berserk counts as seinen, as does Kingdom, Vinland Saga, and Vagabond. All but one of them have gotten an anime adaptation, and if I'm being honest, I'd rather keep Vagabond off anime.
I know absolutely nothing about Vagabond.
Vagabond is a interpretive take on the life of Miyamoto Musashi, and the art is done by Murata.
Could be interesting. Like, I don't often read manga. It's the same reason I don't read comics. It's something about the format doesn't appeal to me. I have read a few though.
Well, the reason I say that is Murata's art style is very detailed.
Sometimes that can be hard to put onto anime unless you have a big budget and a really good studio.
Well, it's the reason why I dread anyone trying to adapt Berserk into animation, because Miura had a very detailed art style. But and don't get me wrong, I like seinen, but there was this idea that would get thrown about that it was better because it was more quote unquote mature. That's the reason why I ended up thinking of that C.S. Lewis quote.
Yeah.
Because more mature storytelling is not necessarily a guarantee of better storytelling. And how many times have we seen somebody talk about how their writing is more mature when it's shit?
Yeah, I've seen quite a few instances where people just like tend to think like, ooh, it's grim and dark and gory, and they think that somehow relates to deep and meaningful.
Yeah, I especially have to deal with that from some people who don't fully grasp Warhammer 40,000. They think, oh, if we just make everything grim, dark, and brutal, then that's 40K. Despite the fact that there's a whole lot more to it than just that. In the same vein, I'd also liken it to the folks who, if you don't mind me using a comic book analogy, consider Superman to be a worse character than, say, Batman, for reasons that are very superficial and very missing the point, usually on that whole quote unquote maturity thing.
Yeah, like, I'll admit I'm not the biggest Superman fan, but that's just because it's not my kind of thing. I do prefer Batman, but it's not like some more meaningful character. Like, you can have just as many deep and meaningful stories with Superman.
Mm-hmm. And the big example of that would be All-Star Superman, which kind of went with this 12 labors approach with him. But if it sounds like I've been focusing less on shonen battle manga itself and more on the people who make these kind of arguments, well, much like when we discussed the Mecha is dead narrative, I'm far less interested in the merit of the argument as I am the people that make it. I'm far more interested in why someone would reflexively turn up their nose at a shonen work than I am the quality of that work itself.
Yeah.
And yeah, sometimes it's just as simple as someone not liking something. But I've learned over the years that nothing is ever simple.
Well, I think it's a mix of elements. I think it's the thing I brought up about lowest common denominator, for some reason having a bit of a stigma to it for some people. I think it's in part comes from a lot of people who just haven't really experienced a lot of stuff, so they have such a narrow window of comparison. And I think some of it people just tend to be reactionary. Because as you said, like, time has done a lot for works that may not have been looked at in the highest regard in the past. And I think, yeah, just as you get older, a little less reactionary, I don't think it's as common at that point to just turn your nose up at a genre you dislike, anything new.
Yeah, and of course and incidentally, this is also the reason why I've had nothing but disrespect for the people who have the modern thing bad, old thing good mentality. I didn't respect them when I was coming up, and that hasn't changed with age.
Don't get me wrong. I have my fun laughing about, like, all the old stuff is better. But if I were to look at my top 5 anime right now, like, my number 5 spot, I'd have about 4 different shows that would have to fight for that spot. 3 of which I've only seen since I started coming back into anime recently. So there's some great new stuff out there. Now I think with anime getting like more popular than ever. There's a lot more shit out there, but that's just because there's a lot more volume.
Yeah. Now, within that, I know how I mentioned that the argument doesn't hold a bit of weight, but then since we brought up the notion of the inspiration ripoff paradox, I'd like to bring up something else in relation to that. And that is certain character archetypes repeated from the same creator. If I had to use a recent example, it would be when people were making character comparisons from Fairy Tail to Eden's Zero. Now, I want to note that at this time, I have not seen Eden's Zero. I plan to eventually. It just hasn't come up yet. But I remember seeing people arguing that Mashima had copy pasted some of his past character designs, and I consider that, and then I consider some of the recurring characters that certain writers I'm familiar with have used in their work, and I have to ask myself the question of is reusing or leaning into certain character designs or archetypes from previous works a damning thing or not?
By and large, I don't have a problem with it. I do think it can be a problem when you're just recycling everything.
Yeah.
But I don't think that happens as often as some people think.
Now, somebody who I'd accuse of recycling is Rumiko Takahashi.
What were the works he's done again?
She.
I'm not great with director names.
Inuyasha, Rinne, and she's definitely far more guilty of reusing certain character archetypes. She's used the Ryoga character like 4 or 5 times, almost verbatim.
Honestly, another thing I've seen a lot of directors do is just reuse scenes. Like Watanabe, like I'm gonna feel stupid if I remember the director of Bebop's name wrong. It is Watanabe, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But like, I know it was in Bebop, Champloo, and Macross. Like, he had a scene where guy gets the shit beat out of him for some reason, wakes up being cared for by one of the female characters of the movie, or series, whichever one you're looking at. Like, he's done that exact scene multiple times, but each time he does it, it has its own unique spin. There's different elements about it. You can even go as far as repeating scenes like that, and I wouldn't say you're just recycling or ripping yourself off.
SF Debris had a video at one point on the difference between homaging and ripping off, and what he ended up saying is that the difference is an homage will add something. And since we brought up Trigun, there's with something like that, there was the running gag of that cat. Because sometimes you just have directors putting in repeat running gags. For whatever reason, the Monty Python crew really didn't like cats, so there'd always be some cat getting stepped on in their work. I don't know why they didn't like cats.
It's just a thing, I guess.
Yeah.
I do like noticing those weird recurring things. You don't really know why it's recurring, but once you notice them,
yeah,
it's kind of hilarious.
But to get back on the rails, there's one of the main reasons I think there's a few reasons I think that the Overhate is a bit on the downturn, even though it is still somewhat present. For one, there's been bigger fish to poke fun at that don't really fall into the shonen battle manga archetype. Like Sword Art Online has become the cool thing to hate. In some more recent seasons, one could argue Attack on Titan could be in that category as well. And that particular hate isn't because of the genre that it's in, but because of, well, the writing. That, and in the case of Sword Art Online, the writer of that decided to be an idiot by accusing Dot Hack of ripping him off.
Dot Hack was first, right?
By a few years, yes. And everybody roasted him about it, including me. The other thing is a lot of the people who are doing that, turning up their noses, have gotten older and hopefully gotten wiser, and the ones that haven't gotten wiser have probably turned into lol cows in their own communities.
Also, while I do agree it's overhated, It's also really easy to poke fun at shonen battle manga.
It's easy to poke fun. It's easy to poke fun at. It's easy to poke fun at it, but I've noticed that the people who are poking fun at it are more aware that they're poking fun of it in good fun and not and not poking fun of it out of some bitterness.
Yeah. But I think when you get like some of the bigger clout chaser types that'll start doing it, I think they kind of misconstrue how easy it is to poke fun at it and think they can just go in and use that as a reason why it's all bad.
But enough about Gigak.
Look, I still only know him from the Mecha is Dead stuff now because of you. I feel like I've lost brain cells because you brought up that topic. I had to watch that stupid shit. I don't even know if the rest of his output's good or not, but
I have not seen the Trash Taste podcast. The only time that I ever dipped into anything close to that is when he was teaming up with Demon Dice to do a actual play of the Konosuba TTRPG, and some folks, including I think one of Katakawa's Twitter accounts, claimed that it was the first Japanese TTRPG to be translated into English.
I think we've been over that one before.
Yeah, because the first one was made in 2008, and more recently there was that video from Gigak about how called a way to avoid anime toxicity, and I'm like,
just don't watch
this
Gigak.
This is very reckless and irresponsible.
And again, just don't watch Gigak right there. He's setting himself up for the easy punchline.
Yeah, and I pick on Gigak for the same reason I pick on Razor Fist. They're both examples of things I don't want to be. But not to get too distracted. I'd say because of how easy the critiques can be, that's the reason why you have clout chasers making them. Unfortunately, a lot of their thunder ends up getting stolen by oddly enough the effect of a bridge series. Because when Team 4-Star was doing their work with DBZ and Hellsing and a few and other works, it's not like they were doing that kind of stuff out of malice.
Yeah, like I remember, I thought the quality kind of went down after a while, but I always felt like they did like Dragon Ball Z. Same thing.
Well, given the stuff like DB Sember that they do and the what if stories that Masako X does, which some of them are really good to the point where he made an audio series out of one of them.
Or even as far back as far as I know, the original abridged series with Yu-Gi-Oh. Mm-hmm. Like Little Karibo, he really does seem to love the show. Yeah, and you can't do something like that without that degree of care, and because of that, it's kind of defanged in a roundabout way a lot of the overhate. Yeah,
because a lot of those remarks that we heard back then don't have as much impact when it can easily be answered with "we know."
Most definitely.
Of course, there's going to be some forms that stick around, but I think that it doesn't hold as much power. So, as a capstone to the question that we opened with of is shonen battle manga overhated, I would say to a certain degree the idea of it still is, but not nearly as bad as it was 20 years ago.
Yeah, because I don't really see the huge hate for something like, say, Demon Slayer. Like, don't get me wrong, I have my problems with Demon Slayer. I will never get over you can smell whether or not a person is trustworthy. But you don't see people like, oh, it's ripping everything off, it's derivative.
The only time you really see that is with people who are either hipsters or people reacting to other people overreacting.
Yeah. Again, I don't follow like as much of the other stuff going on around anime as I think you might. I just pick up what seems interesting to me. I follow what I like. I don't see that level of hatred these days. I remembered seeing it back in the days of Naruto, Bleach, and One Piece being the big ones. Excuse me. But the vitriol seems to have died down the older I get.
Mm-hmm. But I think that about covers this particular sordid affair.
Indeed it does. Now for anyone who listens to this, If you follow any of the links below, you'll be able to see my reviews of any of the anime I've talked about here. You'll be able to follow any of Mildra's other works, be it his tabletop discussions, which there are many, or all of his other video projects over on his YouTube channel. Yeah, just follow our links below, and with that, I think this topic comes to an end.
Stay frosty.